What's up everybody, Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick and I have an album review for you. So yet another one I wanted to go over for the week of the 11th of November was one, I don't know, I just kind of wanted to revisit because this band has always been just kind of interesting in terms of like where they belong in terms of like genre hoppers and shit like that, because they kind of go all over the place. Then I think they kind of have like an interesting history. We're gonna go over the latest offering from He Is Legend, Endless Hallway. This again comes out on the 11th of November on Spine Farm Records. This band formed in 2003 in Wilmington, North Carolina. This is their 7th album overall, and all right, like describing their sound is, I don't know, it's kind of difficult because it is a blend. Like there are elements of hardcore and metalcore, there are elements of sludge metal, maybe even stoner metal, flat out hard rock. There's stuff that kind of echoes like the Foo Fighters, but at the same time also like fiercely holds on to bands like Every Time I Die and Converge. There are elements of classic heavy metal sort of sprinkled in there as well. And I guess at one point this band was technically Christian metal. They started off on Solid State Records and they put out 2 albums on there, and I don't think like they had like the most overt Christian themes, but I guess they kind of fit there. But after that, they sort of started branching out, and when they bring up religion in their songs, it seems like it's more of like a outsider perspective now. So I don't know if the dynamic there has changed, either that or they are just simply Christians that play in a metal band and don't identify themselves as Christian metal anymore. Either way, I think it's very interesting. Now, I got into them with their debut, I Am Hollywood, and after that, like, you kind of heard their sound really start to like morph into kind of different things. Like Suck Out the Poison was vastly different, like, you know, more rooted in like sludge metal and maybe even thrash metal. And then It Hates You and Heavy Fruit kind of just went wild and sort of embracing a little bit more sludge metal along the way. Like this is where the genre hopping really started. And honestly, that's where I really got interested in this band, like just in terms of their constant evolution. And admittedly, I missed their last album, White Bat. I heard it was really good, but I did have the one before that, Few, which I thought was awesome. So this one was definitely on my radar, and this one is, again, a little bit different. Kind of all their albums are a little bit different from one another, but there is sort of a uniform sort of sound to them. The first 2 tracks, The Prowler and Lifeless Lemonade, open up more akin to like Meshuggah or like a band like Ion Dissonance. You have like genty but very dark heavy riffs, some squawky sort of like, you know, alarm clock sounding little squeals in there. The production actually kind of reminded me a lot of like an Ion Dissonance album. The drums are particularly heavy, the guitars are very thick, very down-tuned, but it's how they kind of segue into the different parts, because this band likes to blend a lot of different elements, as I brought up, and how these songs kind of go into like sleazy rockers. The Prowler turns into like a D-beat stomper with an absolutely chug-driven riff, but never really gets like, you know, super like metalcore heavy, mainly because the vocals kind of stay more like sing-songy, or at least sort of a gruff singing approach that's maybe like a little bit bluesy. They're kind of raspy, but you don't get a lot of heavy growls to accompany these big chugs, so it's kind of different. And it's sort of the like ebb and flow of these different styles sort of like interlocking, however, you know, sometimes a little jaggedly, but for the most part really well. The end of the song Honey for the Hive actually sounds kind of like a deathcore song, like something that would be very familiar on an Acacia Strain record, like heavy syncopated slow chugs. You can get a blast beat section there, but the rest of the song kind of, you know, moves around into like different territory, like big pop rock hooks. And pop rock is kind of a part of this. Like, you know, I'm pretty sure this band may have played Warped Tour, but this is like kind of Warped Tour all grown up and matured, and they're willing to kind of break out of that, you know, Warped Tour metalcore pack, even though I don't think this band really was like a huge part of it. Their sound was never like that big poppy metalcore sound where you had like the big sing-songy choruses, like everyone wanted to be Killswitch Engage, but they also wanted to be Fall Out Boy at the same time. These guys embraced a lot of like classic metal and classic hardcore and early metalcore, like namely Cave In and Converge, stuff like that. But they also embraced solid rock hooks, like a big vocal hook, big choruses, big melodies. That is very much on display on songs like Seamstress, and I would definitely say Endless as well. Seamstress especially, it kind of abandons their more wild style for a more straightforward rock hook. It's driven by big riffs, they're still very heavy, but there's also a giant chorus, more melodic verses. And again, it kind of simplifies the formula. It does pretty much the verse chorus thing, but it generates a big hook. And Endless has this interesting little bouncy sort of rhythm to it. The vocal cadences are interesting, and there are like what sound like child choirs doing gang vocals in there, and it's just sort of a weird sounding song, but it generates a very interesting hook. In fact, I think the bridge is one of the catchiest parts in this entire album. Like, it's just a solid fucking melody. But regardless of whether or not they're going like more metal centric or more like kind of big heavy rock centric, the guitars on here just fucking dominate. The riffs are solid. The tone alone is just massive sounding. It kind of drives all the songs, especially when it gets down to like syncopated breakdowns, which those are all over the place here, but used very cleverly. Like, they're not like the big breakdowns where you hear it kind of let in and it's kind of telegraphed, like this is the big mosher part. These are kind of cleverly placed in the songs, and I think add a lot of dynamic. Also, they're doing a lot of cool stuff on top of the breakdowns, whether it be like a weird vocal passage or some cool guitar effects, or doing something that I'm not entirely sure what it is, like the song Circus Circus. There's this weird little sort of rhythmic sound. I'm not sure if it's a guitar effect or it's a vocal cadence, but the interesting rhythm of it and this sort of just strange, like bouncy energy to it is just really interesting. And the vocal hooks on it are absolutely fantastic. Hell, they even get like a little bit bluesy in the song Animals, which I think is a really fucking awesome song. And it's kind of cool, again, to see how these elements complement one each other. There's still that heavy sort of like metalcore or kind of like sleazy sludge metal sort of vibe to it, but there are these cool blues melodies that kind of go through. The vocals kind of have a bluesy swagger to them, and it's one of the few that has like a really distinct solo on it. There's a lot of like lead melodies that are kind of used to complement the main riffs, but in terms of solos, there are very few, and this one has like this really cool bluesy solo. I suppose a complaint I can make about this is this blend becomes kind of homogenized at certain points. It's good, but I feel like they just kind of blend everything into one lump thing, and it just becomes, well, I mean, their sound, but it's not as interesting when you hear like the stark like changes and dynamics in terms of like switching up. Like the early tracks, The Prowler and Lifeless Lemonade, both of those songs really pivot off of some strong dynamics, those stupid heavy fucking chugs versus like some flat out more like hardcore meets hard rock sort of riffs and melodies. There comes a point in like the middle of the album where it kind of just continuously goes for the hook and kind of leaves behind some of the creativity and some of the interesting like polarizing dynamics on here. But the standout tracks on here really just come out and grab you. Like Return to the Garden, I think is particularly interesting because I think there's a storytelling aspect to it. The way it opens up with its kind of sleazy riff and like these descending vocal lines that sound like he's getting progressively more bored telling the story until it does the big like pitch corrected slowdown. And then the song sort of erupts into like a party, but it has this sort of like doomy, ominous chorus that's still very catchy. I just like how that song flows in particular. It's very engaging. Like you're kind of wondering what the story is, and you feel like it kind of matches up with the music. And it even ends with bookending that little opening riff with the slowed down vocal bit. I thought that was really cool, but I think the big standout for me is the last track, Lord Slug. This is the slow, brooding bruiser that is just kind of a little bit darker and a little bit more atmospheric than I would say most of the stuff on this album. It kind of reminds me a lot of Cave-In's last album. It has these giant heavy parts, but they have lush melodies on top of them, kind of quiet verses. And this one actually showcases some like harsh vocals on here. And harsh vocals are very intermittent. Like you get a couple screams here and there, but this one has like a giant heavy section of just throat-ripping screams to match up with the bottom heavy chugs that are all over the song. This was something that I really liked about this album though, was the fact that there are a lot of the same standard tropes you hear in a lot of metalcore or deathcore or even hardcore in here, but with all the blending and infusion of different styles in here, they take those, you know, more standard breakdowns and syncopations and kind of spice them up a little bit, like throwing a bluesy lick here, do predominantly clean vocals on them, like kind of had like a bluesy croon over the fucking songs. And with those added dynamics and this sort of musical adventurousness, they showcase that they can write absolute giant bruisers. In fact, I think this is some of the heaviest stuff that they've written, but they can also write like a really good, solid, hard rock banger that is infectious, like absolutely catchy, like kind of bordering on Foo Fighters level sort of catchiness. And that ability to be able to switch gears and throw in different kinds of hooks coming from different sorts of like musical backgrounds, I think makes this a very interesting album. Admittedly, I hadn't even thought about this band in years. In fact, anytime I hear He Is Legend, I don't think about the band as much as I do think about BillyWitchDoctor.com from Aqua Teen Hunger Force with the whole Arise mega chicken or ultra mega chicken, whichever chicken, it showed up, it killed Carl, and it was a hilarious episode. But after hearing this, I definitely want to listen to more He Is Legend because I forgot how much I really like this band. So overall, I'm going to give this 4 stars. This is a banger and really surprised me in a lot of different ways. Like, again, this is one of their heaviest releases, but it's also 100% them in terms of their whole genre bending style. It's unbelievably heavy, but it's also shockingly accessible and hooky. I really love the songwriting style. It's very wild and frantic. I do think they lay on like one particular style a little bit too long towards the middle, but I think overall the songs gel really well, and the creativity on this album keeps it from getting stale. I will say I would like less vocal filters on here, but overall I thought the vocals were pretty cool, but it does seem like there's a fair amount of filters on it. But overall, like, this sounds great. Like, the production's great, the riffs are awesome, it's very memorable too. If you're a big fan of bands like Every Time I Die, Converge, Cave In, I would even say Maylene and the Sons of Disaster, definitely check this album out. It's a fucking banger. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. There is a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there, as well as our shop. Again, we are currently out of extra large shirts. We're going to have to eventually reload on those, which means I have to find time to get out there and make that order. But we will reload the shop up with extra larges, and eventually we're going to have some different items in there for you guys to check out. Denver Death Fest, eventually we're going to start making some announcements about that because it is long overdue. But I don't know anything yet, but when I know more, I'll be able to say more after, I'm done doing this part of the spiel. And of course, thank you all so much for liking, subscribing, following, all that stuff. Yes, the thank you part of the video. It's as awkward as ever, I promise. But it's necessary because, again, I am super fucking appreciative of all of you, just all the attention and love that this channel has gotten. While this is kind of a lot of work, it is a lot of fun, and I still thoroughly enjoy it, and I'm glad you guys are enjoying it too. So thank you all once again, and we will catch you later.